Captain Marcus Steele Rodriguez had seen his share of combat in 3 tours across Afghanistan and Iraq, but nothing prepared him for the moment when he first heard that voice crackle through his radio during a routine training exercise at Camp Pendleton. The voice was distinctly female, confident, and carrying a call sign that made him chuckle despite himself. "This is Butterfly requesting permission to enter the training zone," came the transmission through his headset. Marcus exchanged amused glances with his fellow Marines in the command tent. Staff Sergeant Jake Morrison, a grizzled veteran with 20 years under his belt, shook his head with a grin. "Butterfly? What's next, Rainbow Unicorn?" he muttered, loud enough for the others to hear. The laughter that rippled through the tent was good-natured but telling. In the hypermasculine world of the Marine Corps, call signs were badges of honor, earned through acts of courage, skill, or sometimes unfortunate incidents that followed Marines throughout their careers. Names like Viper, Thunder, Reaper, and Gunslinger commanded respect before their bearers even entered a room. But Butterfly? It seemed almost whimsical, delicate, perhaps even naive. Marcus keyed his radio with practiced ease, his voice carrying the authority that came naturally to someone who had led Marines through some of the most dangerous territories on Earth. "Butterfly, this is Overlord. You are cleared for entry into Training Zone Alpha 7. Proceed with caution and maintain radio contact." "Copy that, Overlord. Butterfly is inbound." The training exercise was designed to test coordination between air and ground units, something Marcus had overseen dozens of times before. As operations officer for the 3rd Battalion, 7th Marines, he prided himself on running tight, efficient exercises that prepared his Marines for real-world scenarios. Today's mission simulated a rescue operation in hostile territory, complete with mock enemy positions, civilian evacuation protocols, and close air support coordination. What Marcus didn't know was that Butterfly wasn't just another pilot participating in a routine training exercise. The call sign belonged to Captain Sarah Chan, a combat veteran whose reputation preceded her in circles where such things mattered. But, in the insular world of different military units, stories didn't always travel, and assumptions filled the gaps where knowledge should have been. As the exercise progressed, Marcus found himself increasingly impressed by the precision and professionalism of the pilot behind the Butterfly call sign. Her responses were crisp, her situational awareness exceptional, and her ability to coordinate with ground forces demonstrated a level of experience that surprised him. When simulated enemy fire forced a change in the extraction plan, she adapted seamlessly, offering alternative solutions that showed tactical thinking beyond her years. "Overlord, this is Butterfly. I'm seeing movement in Grid Square Echo 47 that wasn't in the briefing. Recommend we adjust our approach vector to avoid potential complications." Marcus pulled up his tactical display, cross-referencing the grid coordinates with the exercise parameters. She was right, there was an unplanned element that could compromise the mission's success. "Good eye, Butterfly. Adjust your approach as recommended." Staff Sergeant Morrison leaned over to Marcus with a raised eyebrow. "Whoever this Butterfly is, she knows her business." "Roger that," Marcus replied, his respect for the unknown pilot growing with each professional exchange. The exercise continued for another 2 hours, during which Butterfly executed maneuvers that drew appreciative comments from the ground controllers. Her ability to provide close air support while maintaining perfect communication with multiple ground units demonstrated a level of skill that commanded respect, regardless of her call sign's unconventional nature. As the training concluded and units began their post-exercise procedures, Marcus felt curious about the pilot who had impressed him so thoroughly. In his experience, the best aviators often had the most interesting stories, and he found himself wondering about the person behind the Butterfly call sign. "Butterfly, this is Overlord," he radioed as the exercise wound down. "Outstanding work today. Your unit should be proud of that performance." "Thank you, Overlord. It was a pleasure working with your ground team. Butterfly out." The radio fell silent, leaving Marcus with questions that would occupy his thoughts for the rest of the day. In the world of military aviation, where ego and bravado often dominated, Butterfly had demonstrated a rare combination of humility and competence that intrigued him. Later that evening, as Marcus reviewed the exercise reports in his quarters, he found himself thinking about the assumptions he and his team had made earlier. The laughter in the command tent felt different now, less justified, more revealing of their own biases than any shortcoming on the part of the mysterious pilot. He had learned long ago that the Marine Corps was changing, that the old stereotypes and assumptions were giving way to a more diverse and capable force. Women had been serving in combat roles for years now, proving themselves in every theater and every capacity. Yet somehow, the surprise he felt at Butterfly's competence revealed how much unconscious bias still lingered, even in someone who considered himself progressive and open-minded. The next morning brought news that would change Marcus's perspective forever. Colonel Patricia Williams, the base commander, called him into her office with an unusual request. "Rodriguez, I want you to attend a ceremony this afternoon. We're presenting some awards to pilots from the 3rd Marine Aircraft Wing, and I think it would be valuable for you to see some of the talent we have in our aviation community." Marcus nodded, always willing to support his fellow Marines. "Of course, ma'am. Anything specific I should know about?" Colonel Williams smiled in a way that suggested she knew something he didn't. "Just keep an open mind, Captain. I think you'll find it educational." The ceremony was held in the base's main auditorium, filled with Marines from various units. Marcus took a seat near the middle, his dress blue uniform pressed to perfection, his ribbons and decorations a testament to his own service record. As the program began, he listened with half attention to the usual speeches about excellence, dedication, and the Corps' values. Then came the individual awards, and Marcus found himself paying closer attention as pilots were called forward to receive recognition for their service. Distinguished flying crosses, air medals, and Purple Hearts were presented with the solemnity such honors deserved. Each recipient's citation was read aloud, detailing acts of courage and skill that exemplified the best of Marine Corps aviation. "The next award," announced the presenter, "goes to a pilot whose exceptional courage and leadership during combat operations in Syria saved the lives of 37 Marines and Navy corpsmen who had been pinned down by enemy fire for over 6 hours." Marcus leaned forward, his attention now fully focused on the proceedings. Captain Sarah Chen, callsign Butterfly, flew 7 consecutive close air support missions over a 12-hour period, expending all available ordnance and returning to base only for fuel and additional weapons. Despite heavy anti-aircraft fire that damaged her aircraft on 3 separate occasions, she maintained station over the endangered Marines until evacuation was complete. Marcus felt his stomach drop as the pieces began to fall into place. The pilot he had been so surprised by, whose competence had impressed him despite his initial amusement at her call sign, was about to be revealed as a decorated combat veteran. During her final mission of that day, the citation continued. Captain Chen's aircraft sustained critical damage from a surface-to-air missile, forcing her to make an emergency landing behind enemy lines. Rather than wait for rescue, she provided ground reconnaissance and coordinated artillery strikes from her position, continuing to support the mission until friendly forces reached her location 8 hours later. The auditorium was silent except for the presenter's voice, every Marine in attendance understanding the gravity of what was being described. For her extraordinary heroism and devotion to duty, Captain Chen is awarded the Silver Star. As Butterfly Captain Sarah Chen walked onto the stage, Marcus felt a complex mix of emotions wash over him. She was smaller than he had expected, perhaps 5 feet 4 inches tall, with an athletic build that spoke of countless hours maintaining the physical standards required of combat pilots. Her uniform was immaculate, her bearing confident without being arrogant, and her expression serious but not grim. But it was her eyes that struck Marcus most profoundly. They carried the weight of someone who had seen combat, who had made life-and-death decisions under impossible circumstances, and who had earned every bit of respect her fellow Marines could give her. These were not the eyes of someone whose call sign was a source of amusement. As the Silver Star was pinned to her uniform, Marcus realized that his laughter from the day before had been based on nothing more than ignorance and assumption. The call sign Butterfly suddenly seemed less whimsical and more mysterious. What was the story behind it? How had this decorated combat veteran come to bear a name that seemed so at odds with her obvious capabilities? The ceremony continued with more awards and recognition, but Marcus found his attention continually drawn back to Captain Chen. When the formal proceedings concluded, he watched as she was surrounded by well-wishers and fellow pilots, all eager to congratulate her on her recognition. The respect in their voices and the deference in their manner made it clear that this was not her first moment in the spotlight. As the crowd began to disperse, Marcus found himself walking toward the group surrounding Captain Chen. He wasn't entirely sure what he intended to say, but he felt compelled to acknowledge both her exceptional service and his own misguided assumptions. When he was close enough to overhear the conversations around her, he caught fragments of stories that painted an even more impressive picture of the pilot he had met only through radio transmissions. References to missions over Damascus, emergency evacuations under fire, and tactical innovations that had saved countless lives created a portrait of someone operating at the highest levels of their profession. "Excuse me, Captain Chen?" She turned toward him, her expression polite but questioning. Up close, Marcus could see the small scar along her left temple, likely from flying debris or shrapnel, and the way her eyes automatically assessed him with the quick evaluation of someone accustomed to rapidly changing situations. "Captain Rodriguez, 3rd Battalion, 7th Marines," he introduced himself, extending his hand. "I was the operations officer for yesterday's training exercise. I wanted to congratulate you on your recognition and thank you for your outstanding performance during our coordination." Her handshake was firm, and her smile genuine. "Thank you, Captain. Your ground team made the coordination seamless. It's always a pleasure to work with professionals who know their business." Marcus hesitated for a moment, then decided that honesty was the best approach. "I have to admit, Captain, that when I first heard your call sign yesterday, I made some assumptions that I now realize were completely unfounded. Your performance during the exercise and learning about your service record today has been educational." Captain Chen's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes suggested that this was not the first time she had encountered such assumptions. "Call signs can be misleading, Captain. They don't always tell the story people expect." "If you don't mind me asking," Marcus said carefully, "how did you come by Butterfly?" For the first time since he had approached her, Captain Chen's expression shifted, revealing what might have been amusement or perhaps something more complex. "That's actually quite a story, Captain Rodriguez. Perhaps we could discuss it over coffee sometime?" Marcus nodded, recognizing both an invitation and a dismissal. "I would like that very much, Captain. Thank you for your service, and congratulations again on your recognition." As he walked away from the ceremony, Marcus found himself reflecting on the day's revelations. His amusement at a call sign he had deemed inappropriate now seemed shallow and presumptuous. The Marine Corps he served prized substance over style, capability over appearance, and results over reputation. Captain Chen embodied all of those values, and her call sign, whatever its origin, was clearly earned rather than assigned. The encounter left Marcus with questions that extended beyond simple curiosity about a fellow Marine's background. It forced him to examine his own assumptions and biases, to consider how often he might have made similar judgments based on incomplete information or surface impressions. That night, as he prepared his after-action report on the training exercise, Marcus found himself writing with unusual care about the performance of the pilot-designated Butterfly. His comments were professional and accurate, praising her tactical awareness, communication skills, and adaptability under changing conditions. But, as he wrote, he was aware that his words carried additional weight now, knowing what he knew about the person behind the call sign. The report would become part of the permanent record, another small piece of documentation in the military's vast bureaucracy. But, for Marcus, it represented something more significant, a lesson in the dangers of assumption and the importance of judging people by their actions rather than their appearances or the labels they carried. As he sealed the report and prepared it for submission, Marcus realized that his encounter with Butterfly had changed him in ways that would influence how he approached similar situations in the future. The laughter in the command tent now seemed like a reminder of how easily competence could be overlooked when it came wrapped in unexpected packaging. The story of Captain Sarah Chen and her call sign remained a mystery, but Marcus suspected that when he eventually heard it, it would be as impressive and instructive as everything else he had learned about her. In a world where first impressions often determined lasting opinions, she had managed to reverse his completely, leaving him with a profound respect for her abilities and a healthy skepticism about his own initial judgments. The Marine Corps was changing, Marcus reflected, and perhaps it was time for his own perspectives to evolve as well. The encounter with Butterfly would serve as a reminder that in a profession where lives depended on competence and courage, the only labels that mattered were Marine and capable. 3 days after the awards ceremony, Marcus found himself sitting across from Captain Sarah Chen in the base coffee shop, a small establishment that served as neutral ground for Marines from different units to decompress and connect away from the formal structures of military hierarchy. The morning rush had passed, leaving them with relative privacy among the scattered tables of off-duty personnel. Sarah arrived precisely on time, dressed in utilities that bore the subtle signs of someone who spent their days around aircraft, small grease stains that never quite came out, the faint scent of jet fuel that became as familiar as cologne, and boots that showed the wear patterns of someone constantly walking on tarmac and climbing into cockpits. "Thank you for taking the time, Captain," Marcus said as she settled into her chair with a cup of black coffee that seemed to be her standard choice. "Please, call me Sarah," she replied, her manner relaxed but alert. "And I should be thanking you. It's not often that someone admits they made assumptions and wants to hear the real story." Marcus stirred sugar into his own coffee, using the motion to organize his thoughts. "I've been thinking about our conversation since the ceremony. Your call sign, there's obviously more to it than what appears on the surface." Sarah smiled, and, for the first time since he had met her, Marcus saw her guard come down slightly. "Most people assume it's because I'm small, or feminine, or that someone was making fun of me. The reality is quite different." She paused to sip her coffee, and Marcus waited patiently, sensing that this was a story she didn't tell often or lightly. "It started during my first deployment to Afghanistan," Sarah began, her voice taking on the measured cadence of someone recounting significant events. "I was flying Cobra attack helicopters out of Camp Bastion, conducting close air support missions for Marines operating in Helmand Province." Marcus nodded, familiar with the area and the type of operations she was describing. Helmand had been one of the most dangerous provinces in Afghanistan, with intense combat operations that had tested every aspect of Marine Corps capabilities. "There was a forward operating base called Butterfly Point," Sarah continued. "Ridiculous name for such a dangerous place, but someone in intelligence had a sense of humor. It was positioned in a valley that was strategically important but tactically nightmare, surrounded on 3 sides by high ground that gave the enemy every advantage." As she spoke, Marcus could see her mentally returning to those missions, her eyes focusing on something beyond the coffee shop's mundane surroundings. The Marines at Butterfly Point were getting hit constantly. IED attacks on their supply convoys, sniper fire during patrols, mortar attacks at night. They were isolated, undersupplied, and taking casualties. The brass wanted to abandon the position, but the ground commander, Lieutenant Colonel James Mitchell, insisted it was too important to give up. Sarah's voice carried the weight of someone who had seen the human cost of such strategic decisions. "That's where I came in. My squadron was tasked with providing regular close air support for Butterfly Point, flying daily missions to suppress enemy activity and support Marine operations in the area. It was dangerous work. The enemy had learned to position anti-aircraft weapons in the surrounding hills, and we were taking fire on almost every mission." Marcus leaned forward slightly, drawn into the story by Sarah's matter-of-fact delivery of what were clearly harrowing experiences. "The situation came to a head during what became known as the Battle of Butterfly Point. Intelligence indicated that the Taliban were planning a major assault on the base, with forces converging from multiple directions. The plan was to overrun the position during a coordinated night attack when our air support would be limited." Sarah paused again, and Marcus noticed that her hands, wrapped around her coffee cup, were completely steady despite the intensity of the memories she was sharing. "I volunteered for the night missions. Flying attack helicopters in combat at night is complicated under the best circumstances, but, in terrain like Helmand, with enemy forces equipped with heat-seeking missiles, it's essentially a suicide mission." The casual way she described risking her life struck Marcus as typically Marine understated, focused on the mission rather than personal heroics. "The attack came just after midnight on a moonless night. The enemy had coordinated better than our intelligence predicted, hitting the base from 4 directions simultaneously while mortar teams provided covering fire from the surrounding hills." Sarah's narrative transported Marcus to that violent night, and he found himself visualizing the chaos and confusion of a base under siege. "I flew 7 missions that night, each time returning to base just long enough to refuel and rearm. The enemy had positioned themselves expertly, using the terrain to mask their movements and protect their heavy weapons. Every time I made an attack run, I was flying into concentrated anti-aircraft fire. She described the technical challenges of night combat flying with the precision of someone who had mastered every aspect of her craft, the difficulties of target identification through night vision equipment, the constant threat of missile locks, the complex coordination required to avoid hitting friendly forces in the chaos of close-quarters combat. On my fourth mission, I took a hit from a surface-to-air missile that damaged my tail rotor and navigation systems. Standard procedure would have been to return to base immediately, but the Marines at Butterfly Point were being overrun. They had casualties who needed immediate medical evacuation, and enemy forces were breaking through their perimeter in 2 locations. Marcus realized he was holding his breath as Sarah described continuing her mission in a damaged aircraft. I stayed on station for another 3 hours, using my remaining weapons to support the Marine ground forces while coordinating medical evacuations and calling in artillery strikes. The damaged aircraft was flying like a wounded bird, but she held together long enough to make a difference. The understated heroism of her account was characteristic of the best combat veterans Marcus had known. They described extraordinary acts of courage as simply doing their job. When I finally returned to base, the aircraft was barely flyable. The maintenance crew chief took one look at the damage and told me I was lucky to be alive. But the Marines at Butterfly Point had held their position, and all the wounded had been successfully evacuated. Sarah finished her story and looked directly at Marcus, her expression serious but not dramatic. The next morning, Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell radioed our squadron commander to request that I be assigned as the primary close air support pilot for Butterfly Point operations. He said that as long as Butterfly's guardian angel was watching over them, his Marines could handle anything the enemy could throw at them. Marcus felt the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. So Butterfly wasn't about you at all. It was about them, Sarah confirmed. The call sign stuck because word got around about the pilot who kept the Marines at Butterfly Point alive. Every subsequent mission I flew was in support of that base or similar operations. The name became associated with close air support missions where Marine lives were on the line. The story reframed everything Marcus thought he knew about call signs and their significance. What he had initially seen as whimsical or inappropriate was actually a badge of honor that connected Sarah to some of the most dangerous and critical missions of the Afghanistan conflict. "How many missions did you fly for Butterfly Point?" Marcus asked. 87 combat missions over 6 months, Sarah replied without hesitation. Not all of them were as dramatic as that first night, but every one of them mattered to the Marines on the ground. Marcus was quiet for several moments, processing the magnitude of what Sarah had shared. 87 combat missions was an extraordinary number, each one representing a risk taken in service of fellow Marines. "I owe you an apology," he said finally. "Not just for my assumptions about your call sign, but for the attitude my team and I displayed during that training exercise." Sarah waved off his concern with a gesture that suggested this was not the first time she had encountered such reactions. "You couldn't have known, and, honestly, the assumptions come with the territory. I've learned to let my performance speak for itself." "But that's not fair," Marcus protested. "You shouldn't have to prove yourself every time you work with a new unit." Sarah smiled at his indignation on her behalf. "Fair or not, it's reality. The Marine Corps is changing, but change takes time. Every successful mission, every professional interaction, every time someone like you takes the time to learn the real story, it all adds up to progress." Marcus found himself impressed not just by Sarah's combat record, but by her mature perspective on the challenges she faced as a female Marine in a traditionally male-dominated field. "What happened to Butterfly Point?" he asked, curious about the conclusion to the story. "The Marines held it for another 8 months before strategic priorities changed and it was finally abandoned," Sarah replied. "By then, the tactical situation in Helmand had shifted, and the position was no longer as critical. But during the time they held it, Butterfly Point served as a base for dozens of successful operations that disrupted enemy supply lines and protected Afghan civilians in the surrounding villages." The conversation had given Marcus a new appreciation for the complexity of military operations and the human stories behind tactical decisions. The base with the seemingly frivolous name had been the site of genuine heroism and sacrifice. "Are you still flying combat missions?" Marcus asked. Sarah shook her head. "I'm currently an instructor pilot here at Pendleton, training the next generation of Marine aviators. Combat tours take their toll, and I wanted to pass on what I learned before I forgot the lessons." Marcus recognized the wisdom in her decision. The best combat veterans often transitioned into training roles where their experience could benefit countless other Marines. "Do you miss it? The combat flying?" Sarah considered the question carefully before responding. "I miss the clarity of purpose and the direct impact you could have on Marine lives. Training pilots is important work, but it's more abstract. When you're providing close air support for Marines under fire, you know exactly why you're there and what success looks like." Her honest reflection on the transition from combat to training roles resonated with Marcus, who had experienced similar feelings when moving from line units to staff positions. "What advice would you give to Marines like me, ground officers who work with aviation assets but don't always understand the pilot's perspective?" Sarah appreciated the question and the genuine desire for improvement it represented. "Remember that every pilot you work with has a story, just like every Marine on the ground. Call signs might seem arbitrary, but they usually represent something significant to the person who earned them. More importantly, focus on communication and mutual respect. The best air-ground coordination happens when both sides understand each other's capabilities and limitations." Marcus nodded, filing away her advice for future operations. "Is there anything ground officers consistently get wrong about working with aviation?" "They sometimes assume we can see everything from up there," Sarah replied with a slight smile. "The view from a cockpit is actually quite limited, especially in an attack helicopter. We're dependent on your eyes on the ground to paint the complete tactical picture." The technical discussion that followed gave Marcus insights into aviation operations that would improve his effectiveness as a ground coordinator. Sarah explained the challenges of target identification from altitude, the limitations of onboard sensors, and the critical importance of clear, precise communication between air and ground units. As their conversation continued, Marcus found himself gaining not just technical knowledge but a deeper appreciation for the professionalism and expertise required for combat aviation. Sarah's patient explanations and willingness to share her experience represented the best tradition of Marines helping Marines. "I should probably head back," Sarah said eventually, checking her watch. "I have a training flight this afternoon with some new pilots who are still learning the basics." Marcus stood as she gathered her things. "Thank you for sharing your story, Sarah. And thank you for your service, both in combat and in training the next generation." She smiled and extended her hand for a firm handshake. "Thank you for asking, Marcus. And for being open to learning something new." As she walked away, Marcus remained at the table for several minutes, processing everything he had learned. The story of Butterfly had transformed his understanding not just of call signs, but of the assumptions he made about fellow Marines and the importance of looking beyond surface impressions. The experience had been educational in the best sense, not just providing new information, but challenging his perspectives and encouraging growth. Marcus realized that Sarah's story would influence how he approached future interactions with Marines from different backgrounds and specialties. But, more than that, her account of the Battle of Butterfly Point had reminded him why he served. The Marine Corps' mission of protecting fellow Marines and accomplishing the mission resonated through every aspect of Sarah's story. Her willingness to risk her life repeatedly for Marines on the ground embodied the Corps' values in their purest form. As Marcus finally rose to leave the coffee shop, he carried with him not just Sarah's story, but a renewed appreciation for the complexity and dedication of the Marines around him. The encounter had been a reminder that every uniform contained a unique story of service, sacrifice, and commitment to something larger than oneself. The lesson would stay with him long after the details of their conversation had faded, serving as a constant reminder to approach his fellow Marines with respect, curiosity, and an open mind. In a world where first impressions often became lasting judgments, Sarah had taught him the value of digging deeper and seeking the real story behind the surface details. 2 weeks after his coffee conversation with Sarah, Marcus was deep into planning a major training exercise that would involve multiple battalions and test the limits of inter-unit coordination. The exercise, dubbed Iron Thunder, was designed to simulate a complex amphibious assault followed by sustained ground operations, requiring seamless integration between infantry, armor, artillery, and aviation assets. Marcus sat in the operations center at 0530, surrounded by maps, communication equipment, and the organized chaos that preceded any major military operation. Coffee cups and energy drink cans littered the workspace, evidence of the long hours his team had been putting in to ensure every detail was perfect. Staff Sergeant Morrison approached his desk with a communication that would change the day's priorities entirely. "Captain, we just received a Priority 1 message from Division. There's been an incident involving civilian hikers in the Cleveland National Forest. Search and Rescue is requesting immediate Marine Corps assistance." Marcus looked up from his planning documents, his mind immediately shifting from training scenarios to real-world emergency response. "What's the situation?" Morrison consulted his notes, his expression serious. A group of college students from UC San Diego went hiking yesterday morning in the remote section of the forest near Palomar Mountain. They were supposed to return by evening, but never showed up. Their vehicles are still in the parking area where they left them. "Weather conditions?" Marcus asked, already thinking about the factors that would affect search and rescue operations. "That's the problem, sir." A winter storm moved in overnight, bringing heavy rain, wind, and dropping temperatures. The area they were hiking is known for its difficult terrain, steep ravines, dense forest, and limited cell phone coverage. Marcus felt the familiar weight of responsibility that came with emergency operations. Unlike training exercises where mistakes were learning opportunities, real-world emergencies carry genuine stakes where decisions could mean the difference between life and death. "How many missing hikers?" 6 students, aged 19 to 22. Mix of males and females. Local search and rescue teams started looking for them at first light, but the weather is grounding most of their aircraft and limiting the effectiveness of ground teams. The situation was complicated by several factors that Marcus recognized from his experience with emergency response operations. Civilian hikers often underestimated the dangers of backcountry terrain, especially when weather conditions changed rapidly. The combination of cold, wet conditions and potential injuries created a time-sensitive situation where every hour of delay increased the risk to the missing students. "What assets are we being asked to provide?" Morrison referred to his message traffic again. "Division wants us to coordinate helicopter search operations using our IFR-rated pilots. The civilian aircraft can't fly safely in current weather conditions, but our Hueys and Cobras have the capability to operate in marginal weather." Marcus nodded, understanding the logic behind the request. Marine Corps helicopters were built for combat operations in adverse conditions, and their pilots were trained to fly missions that would ground civilian aircraft. But weather that challenged even military aircraft required the most experienced and skilled pilots available. "Who's our senior helicopter pilot available for immediate deployment?" "That would be Captain Chen, sir. She's current on instrument flying and has more bad weather flying hours than anyone else in the squadron." Marcus felt a moment of recognition and something approaching relief. Sarah's experience and proven judgment under pressure made her the ideal choice for a dangerous search and rescue mission. Her combat background had prepared her for exactly the kind of high-stakes operation they were facing. "Get Captain Chan on the radio. I want to brief her personally on the situation." Within minutes, Sarah's voice came through the communication system, crisp and professional despite the early hour. "This is Butterfly. Go ahead, Overlord." Marcus keyed his microphone, grateful for the familiar voice of someone he knew could handle whatever challenges the mission might present. "Butterfly, we have an emergency search and rescue situation developing in the Cleveland National Forest. 6 civilian hikers are missing in severe weather conditions. We need immediate helicopter support for search operations." "Copy, Overlord. What are current weather conditions at the search area?" Marcus consulted the meteorological reports that had been flowing in throughout the early morning hours. Visibility is down to less than a mile due to heavy rain and fog. Ceiling is approximately 800 feet with gusty winds up to 35 knots. Temperature is dropping into the 30s. There was a brief pause before Sarah responded, and Marcus could picture her mentally calculating the risks and requirements for flying in such conditions. Overlord, those are challenging conditions but manageable with proper precautions. What's the terrain like in the search area? Mountainous with steep ravines and dense forest cover. Multiple ridgelines rising to over 5,000 feet. Limited areas suitable for landing. Marcus could hear the sound of aircraft engines spooling up in the background of Sarah's transmission, indicating that preparations were already underway at the aviation unit. Understood, Overlord. I'll need detailed topographical maps of the search area and any information available about the hikers' planned route. Also requesting a ground coordination team to manage communication with local search and rescue units. The professional efficiency with which Sarah was approaching the mission reinforced Marcus's confidence in her abilities. Her immediate focus on the critical information needed for mission planning demonstrated the systematic thinking that separated exceptional pilots from merely competent ones. All information will be available at your aircraft within 15 minutes. What's your estimated time for mission launch? Butterfly will be airborne in 30 minutes, weather permitting. Requesting priority handling for this mission. Marcus coordinated with air traffic control and local authorities while Sarah prepared her aircraft and flight crew for the challenging mission ahead. The search and rescue operation would require not just exceptional flying skills, but also the ability to coordinate with multiple agencies, manage communications in difficult terrain, and make split-second decisions that could affect the outcome of the mission. 25 minutes later, Marcus heard the distinctive sound of a UH-1Y Venom helicopter lifting off from the airfield. Through his office window, he could see the aircraft climbing into the gray, stormy sky, its navigation lights barely visible in the rain and low clouds. Overlord, this is Butterfly airborne and proceeding to search area. Weather is as advertised, challenging but manageable. Establishing communication with local incident commander. The next several hours tested every aspect of Sarah's skills as both a pilot and mission commander. Flying in the marginal weather conditions required constant attention to instruments and flight parameters while simultaneously coordinating search patterns with ground teams and other aircraft. Marcus monitored the operation from his command post, tracking Sarah's progress on radar and maintaining communication with the various agencies involved in the search effort. Her reports painted a picture of methodical, professional search operations conducted under increasingly difficult conditions. Overlord, Butterfly is completing grid search of Sector Alpha. No visual contact with missing hikers. Weather is deteriorating, visibility now less than half a mile and ceiling dropping. Requesting guidance on continuation of search operations. Marcus consulted with the incident commander and meteorological team before responding. The weather was approaching the limits of safe helicopter operations, but the missing hikers situation was becoming increasingly desperate as temperatures continued to drop. Butterfly, incident commander reports that ground teams have found possible evidence of the hikers' passage in Sector Charlie. Recommend you focus search efforts in that area, but maintain safety as your primary concern. No mission is worth risking your crew. Copy, Overlord. Proceeding to Sector Charlie for focused search. What happened next would become part of Marine Corps aviation lore, retold in ready rooms and training sessions for years to come. Sarah's voice came across the radio with the calm professionalism that characterized her communications, but Marcus could hear the underlying intensity that indicated a significant development. Overlord, this is Butterfly. I have visual contact with what appears to be the missing hikers. They're in a ravine approximately 200 meters north of the main trail, visible from the air but inaccessible to ground teams due to the terrain. Marcus felt the rush of adrenaline that came with potentially successful rescue operations. Outstanding, Butterfly. What's their condition? I can see 6 individuals, but they appear to be in distress. At least 2 are not moving, possibly injured or hypothermic. The group has attempted to build some kind of shelter, but it's inadequate for current weather conditions. The situation had reached its critical phase. The hikers had been located, but extracting them from a ravine in mountainous terrain during severe weather would challenge every aspect of Sarah's piloting abilities. Butterfly, assess your ability to conduct rescue operations at that location. Another pause, longer this time, as Sarah evaluated the terrain, weather, and capabilities of her aircraft. Overlord, direct helicopter landing is not possible due to terrain and obstacles. However, I can conduct a hoist rescue operation if we can get appropriate personnel and equipment on scene. Marcus coordinated rapidly with the rescue teams, arranging for a pararescue specialist to be brought to Sarah's location for the hoist operation. The plan would require Sarah to maintain precise hovering position over the ravine while the specialist was lowered to assist the hikers. Butterfly, pararescue team is en route to your location. Estimated arrival 15 minutes. Copy, Overlord. I'll maintain overwatch of the hikers until rescue team arrives. Weather continues to deteriorate, but I can hold position for now. For the next quarter hour, Marcus listened to Sarah's steady voice reporting on the condition of the hikers and coordinating with incoming rescue assets. Her calm professionalism in the face of challenging conditions reminded him of the qualities that had earned her the Silver Star and made her call sign a symbol of reliable support for Marines in danger. The rescue operation that followed required every bit of Sarah's skill and experience. Hovering a helicopter in gusty wind conditions over mountainous terrain while a pararescue specialist conducted hoist operations was one of the most technically demanding tasks in aviation. Overlord, beginning hoist operations now. First hiker appears to be hypothermic but conscious. Pararescue specialist is packaging him for extraction. Marcus found himself holding his breath as he listened to Sarah's matter-of-fact descriptions of an operation that was both technically complex and potentially life-saving. First hiker is secure and being hoisted to aircraft. He's responsive but cold. Beginning extraction of second hiker, this one appears to have a leg injury in addition to hypothermia. The operation continued for over an hour as Sarah maintained precise control of her aircraft while 6 hikers were individually extracted from the ravine. Each hoist operation required perfect coordination between pilot, crew chief, and pararescue specialist, all while operating in weather conditions that were testing the limits of aircraft capabilities. Overlord, this is Butterfly. All 6 hikers have been successfully extracted and are receiving medical attention aboard my aircraft. Proceeding to Palomar Medical Center for immediate medical evaluation. Marcus felt the profound satisfaction that came with successful emergency operations. 6 lives had been saved through the professional skill and dedication of Marines and their partners in the emergency response community. Outstanding work, Butterfly. Medical Center has been notified of your inbound arrival with 6 hypothermia patients. The flight to the medical center took another 30 minutes, during which Sarah's crew provided basic medical care to the rescued hikers. Her reports indicated that while all 6 were suffering from exposure to cold and wet conditions, their injuries appeared to be non-life-threatening thanks to the timely rescue. Overlord, Butterfly has delivered all 6 hikers to medical personnel at Palomar Medical Center. All patients were conscious and responsive upon arrival. Mission complete. Marcus felt deep pride in Sarah's performance and in the Marine Corps capabilities that had made the rescue possible. The operation had demonstrated everything the Corps stood for: technical excellence, dedication to saving lives, and the willingness to accept risk in service of others. Butterfly, outstanding mission execution. Return to base when ready. Full debrief will be conducted upon your arrival. The rescue operation had taken nearly 6 hours from initial notification to mission completion. During that time, Sarah had demonstrated the skills, judgment, and dedication that exemplified the best of Marine Corps aviation. Her performance under pressure had saved 6 lives and reinforced the reputation of Marine pilots as among the most capable in the world. As Sarah's aircraft appeared on the horizon, returning to base through weather that was finally beginning to improve, Marcus reflected on the day's events. The emergency had interrupted their training exercise planning, but it had provided a real-world demonstration of why such training was important. More personally, the mission had given Marcus additional insight into the character and capabilities of the pilot he had initially misjudged based on her call sign. Sarah's calm professionalism during a life-and-death emergency had reinforced the lesson that competence and courage came in many forms, not all of which fit traditional expectations. The successful rescue would be documented in official reports and added to the list of missions that justified the Marine Corps' reputation for excellence in emergency response operations. But, for Marcus, it would serve as a reminder that the most important judgments about fellow Marines should be based on their actions under pressure, not their call signs or any other superficial characteristics. As Butterfly touched down safely at Pendleton, completing another successful mission, Marcus prepared to welcome her back with the respect and appreciation that her performance had earned. The morning briefing 3 months later felt routine until Colonel Williams entered the conference room with an expression that immediately commanded attention. Marcus, now serving as the battalion's executive officer following his promotion, sensed that whatever announcement was coming would significantly impact their unit's operations. "Gentlemen and ladies," the colonel began, "we have received deployment orders for Operation Desert Shield 2. The situation in the Middle East has deteriorated rapidly, and Marine forces are being deployed to provide security and stability in the region." Marcus felt the familiar mixture of anticipation and concern that accompanied deployment announcements. After months of training exercises and garrison duties, the prospect of real-world operations brought both professional excitement and awareness of the genuine risks that would face his Marines. "This deployment will test every aspect of our training and preparation," Colonel Williams continued. "We'll be operating in a joint environment with forces from multiple services and allied nations. Our mission will include convoy security, forward operating base defense, and close air support for special operations forces." The briefing covered the standard details of deployment preparation, logistics, timeline, personnel requirements, and mission parameters. But Marcus found his attention drawn to the aviation support elements that would be accompanying their unit. Air support will be provided by elements of the 3rd Marine Aircraft Wing, including both rotary and fixed-wing assets. Captain Chen will serve as our aviation liaison officer, coordinating all air operations from the ground perspective. Marcus felt a moment of surprise and professional satisfaction at this announcement. Sarah's assignment as aviation liaison would bring her exceptional experience and judgment to their operations, ensuring that air-ground coordination would be conducted at the highest professional level. The deployment preparation period that followed was intensive and comprehensive. Marcus found himself working closely with Sarah as they developed tactical procedures, communication protocols, and contingency plans for the various scenarios they might encounter in theater. During one late-night planning session, as they reviewed close air support procedures in a conference room filled with maps, technical manuals, and empty coffee cups, Sarah shared her perspective on the upcoming deployment. "This mission is different from Afghanistan," she said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen multiple combat deployments. "The political situation is more complex, the rules of engagement are more restrictive, and we'll be operating in an environment where every action will be scrutinized by multiple levels of command." Marcus appreciated her insights, recognizing that her combat experience provided perspectives that complemented his own operational background. "What concerns you most about this deployment?" Sarah considered the question carefully before responding. "The integration challenges. We'll be working with special operations forces who have their own procedures, allied units with different training and equipment, and civilian agencies with completely different priorities. Success will depend on our ability to adapt and communicate effectively across all those boundaries." Her analysis proved prescient when they arrived in theater 6 weeks later. The forward operating base they established in an undisclosed location was a complex environment where Marines worked alongside Army Special Forces, British paratroopers, and civilian contractors, all while conducting operations in support of broader strategic objectives. Marcus's responsibilities as executive officer kept him focused on the administrative and logistical aspects of their deployment, but he maintained regular contact with Sarah as she coordinated aviation support for the various missions their unit was tasked with conducting. The first major test of their partnership came during a mission that would become known as the Ghost Highway Operation. Intelligence had identified a supply route used by hostile forces to transport weapons and personnel through their area of operations. The mission was to establish checkpoints and conduct interdiction operations along this route. "The challenge," Sarah explained during the mission briefing, "is that the enemy knows we're coming. they've had time to prepare defensive positions and escape routes. Our air assets will be operating in a high-threat environment where surface-to-air missiles and anti-aircraft artillery pose significant risks. The operation involved multiple phases conducted over several days. Ground forces would establish forward positions along the supply route while aviation assets provided overwatch and close air support as needed. The complexity of coordinating between multiple units in a fluid tactical environment would test every aspect of their training and preparation. Marcus coordinated the ground elements from the main command post while Sarah managed aviation operations from a forward position that gave her direct communication with both ground forces and aircraft. The arrangement allowed for rapid response to changing tactical situations while maintaining overall command coordination. The mission began smoothly, with ground forces successfully establishing their positions and aviation assets conducting initial reconnaissance flights without enemy contact. But, by the second day, the situation had evolved into something far more complex and dangerous. "Overlord, this is Butterfly," Sarah's voice came through Marcus's headset during what had seemed like a routine morning briefing. "We have a situation developing in Sector 7. Ground Team Alpha is reporting enemy contact, and they're requesting immediate close air support." Marcus pulled up the tactical display showing the positions of all friendly forces in the area. Ground Team Alpha was conducting a checkpoint operation at a strategic choke point along the supply route, but intelligence had not predicted the level of enemy resistance they were encountering. "Butterfly, what's the nature of the contact?" Ground Team Alpha reports they're taking fire from multiple positions. At least one Marine is wounded, and they're requesting immediate extraction of casualties along with fire support to suppress enemy positions. The request for casualty evacuation added urgency to an already complex situation. Marcus coordinated with medical personnel while Sarah managed the aviation response to support the embattled ground team. "Overlord, I'm coordinating 2 aircraft for this mission, 1 Cobra for close air support and 1 Huey for medical evacuation. Both aircraft will be operating in a high-threat environment with confirmed enemy anti-aircraft weapons in the area." Marcus understood the risks Sarah was describing. Medical evacuation missions were among the most dangerous in military aviation because they required aircraft to land or hover in areas where enemy forces were actively engaged, making them vulnerable to concentrated fire. "Who's piloting the medical evacuation aircraft?" "I'll be taking that mission personally," Sarah replied in a tone that indicated the decision was already made. The tactical situation requires someone with maximum experience in high-threat environments. Marcus felt concern for Sarah's safety, but he also recognized that her exceptional skills made her the logical choice for the most dangerous aspect of the mission. Medical evacuation under fire required precision flying, tactical awareness, and the ability to make split-second decisions under extreme pressure. "Copy, Butterfly. Keep me informed of mission status." For the next 2 hours, Marcus monitored the developing situation from his command post while Sarah coordinated one of the most complex aviation operations of their deployment. Her calm voice provided regular updates as she managed multiple aircraft, communicated with ground forces under fire, and prepared for a medical evacuation mission in contested airspace. "Overlord, this is Butterfly. I'm inbound to the landing zone for casualty evacuation." Ground Team Alpha reports the area is still taking sporadic fire, but they have the wounded Marine prepared for immediate extraction. Marcus found himself holding his breath as he listened to Sarah's transmissions. Medical evacuation missions were always tense, but conducting them under fire in mountainous terrain tested every aspect of a pilot's skills and judgment. "Butterfly, Ground Team Alpha reports enemy sniper activity from elevated positions overlooking the landing zone. Cobra aircraft are engaging those positions now." The sound of aircraft weapons systems echoed through Sarah's radio transmissions as attack helicopters provided covering fire for her approach to the landing zone. The coordination between different aircraft while ground forces marked targets and directed fire required seamless communication and split-second timing. "Overlord, I'm on final approach to the landing zone. Ground team has the wounded Marine ready for immediate loading." Marcus could hear the tension in the radio transmissions from ground forces as they provided security for the incoming medical evacuation aircraft. Enemy fire was continuing despite the suppressive fires from attack helicopters, making the landing a high-risk operation.
Butterfly is on the ground. Loading wounded Marine now.
The most vulnerable moments of any medical evacuation mission came when the aircraft was on the ground, unable to maneuver and presenting a stationary target for enemy fire. Sarah's crew would be working rapidly to load the wounded Marine while maintaining security and preparing for immediate departure.
Wounded Marine is secured aboard. Butterfly is lifting off. Marcus felt relief as Sarah's aircraft successfully departed the landing zone with the wounded Marine aboard.
But the mission was far from over. The flight to the medical facility would take 30 minutes, during which they would remain vulnerable to enemy fire and the wounded Marine would continue to require medical attention.
Overlord, this is Butterfly en route to medical facility.
Wounded Marine is conscious and stable.
Estimated arrival in 25 minutes.
The successful completion of the medical evacuation mission represented the best traditions of Marine Corps aviation, the willingness to accept risk in order to save fellow Marines' lives. Sarah's professional execution under extreme pressure had ensured that a wounded Marine received the medical care he needed in the shortest possible time. But the day's operations were far from over. As Sarah returned from the medical facility, Marcus received intelligence indicating that the enemy was planning a coordinated counterattack against their positions along the supply route. Butterfly, we have intelligence suggesting enemy forces are massing for a coordinated attack on our checkpoint positions. We may need extensive close air support over the next several hours.
Copy, Overlord.
I'll coordinate with all available aircraft for sustained operations.
What's the threat assessment? Marcus consulted with the intelligence team before responding.
Enemy forces include mortars, rocket-propelled grenades, and confirmed surface-to-air missile capabilities. They appear to be planning simultaneous attacks on multiple positions to overwhelm our response capabilities.
The tactical situation was evolving into exactly the kind of complex, multi-phase engagement that tested military units' training and adaptability.
Success would require seamless coordination between ground and air forces while maintaining the flexibility to respond to rapidly changing conditions. Over the next 6 hours, Sarah coordinated aviation support for what became one of the most intense engagements of their deployment. Multiple enemy attacks against different positions required constant repositioning of aircraft, coordination of fires, and adaptation to changing tactical requirements. Throughout the extended engagement, Sarah's voice remained calm and professional as she managed complex aviation operations under extreme pressure. Her experience and judgment proved critical as she coordinated between different types of aircraft, communicated with ground forces under fire, and made tactical decisions that affected the outcome of multiple simultaneous battles. The engagement finally concluded near sunset with enemy forces withdrawing from contact after sustaining significant casualties. All Marine positions had successfully repelled the coordinated attacks, and no additional friendly casualties had been sustained.
Overlord, this is Butterfly.
Enemy forces appear to be withdrawing from all positions. Air assets are conducting battle damage assessment and pursuing retreating forces.
Marcus felt exhausted relief as the day's intense operations finally began to wind down.
The successful defense of their positions had required exceptional performance from every Marine involved, but Sarah's coordination of aviation support had been particularly critical to the mission's success. As aircraft returned to base and ground forces consolidated their positions, Marcus began preparing the after-action reports that would document the day's events. But before focusing on administrative tasks, he wanted to personally acknowledge Sarah's exceptional performance.
Butterfly, outstanding work today.
Your coordination and personal courage under fire saved lives and ensured mission success.
Thank you, Overlord.
It was a team effort, and I was proud to be part of it. As Marcus completed his reports that evening, he reflected on how his relationship with Sarah had evolved from his initial misconceptions about her call sign to deep professional respect for her capabilities and character. The day's operations had demonstrated once again that the most important measure of a Marine was their performance under pressure, not any superficial characteristics or assumptions. The deployment continued for several more months, with Marcus and Sarah working together on numerous operations that tested their skills and strengthened their professional partnership. But it was during the final week of their deployment that Marcus would learn the most significant lesson of his military career. Intelligence had identified a high-value target, an enemy commander whose capture could significantly impact hostile operations in the region. The mission would require coordination between Special Operations Forces, conventional ground units, and aviation assets in a complex operation conducted in extremely dangerous territory. As the mission briefing concluded, Marcus heard something that stopped him cold. The Special Operations Commander, a Navy SEAL lieutenant commander with multiple combat deployments, concluded his portion of the briefing with a simple statement: aviation coordination for this mission will be handled by Geronimo Actual. Marcus felt his world shift as he realized that Geronimo Actual referred to Sarah. The call sign that commanded instant respect and recognition throughout the special operations community belonged to the pilot he had once laughed at for being named Butterfly. After the briefing, Marcus approached Sarah with a mixture of curiosity and awe.
Geronimo Actual? Sarah smiled with what might have been amusement at his obvious surprise. Different communities, different call signs. In the special operations world, I'm known for a different set of missions.
What missions? That, Sarah said with a diplomatic smile, is classified above your clearance level. But, let's just say that Butterfly represents my Marine Corps service, while Geronimo Actual represents some other work I've done. Marcus realized that his education about making assumptions was far from complete. The pilot he thought he had come to know completely still carried secrets that spoke to levels of service and capability he was only beginning to understand. The mission proceeded with Sarah Geronimo Actual coordinating aviation support for an operation so sensitive that Marcus was excluded from most of the tactical details. But, the professional deference shown to her by the Special Operations Forces made it clear that her reputation in that community was based on extraordinary achievements. As their deployment concluded and they prepared to return to the United States, Marcus found himself reflecting on the journey his relationship with Sarah had taken. From initial amusement at her call sign, through growing respect for her capabilities, to awe at the breadth of her service, each revelation had challenged his assumptions and expanded his understanding. The Marine Corps had taught him many lessons over his career, but none had been more important than learning to judge people by their actions rather than his expectations. Sarah had been an exceptional teacher in that regard, demonstrating through her consistent professionalism and extraordinary capabilities that the most important qualities of a Marine: courage, competence, and commitment could not be judged by surface appearances. As they boarded the aircraft that would take them home, Marcus carried with him not just memories of a successful deployment, but a transformed perspective on leadership, assumption, and the complex nature of service in the modern military. The lessons learned from Butterfly and Geronimo Actual would influence his approach to command for the remainder of his career. The story had begun with laughter at a call sign that seemed inappropriate and had evolved into profound respect for a Marine whose service embodied the highest traditions of the Corps. For Marcus, it served as a permanent reminder that the most important judgments about fellow Marines should be based on their character and capabilities, not on any preconceived notions about how those qualities should be packaged or presented. In the end, the call sign Butterfly had been exactly what it appeared to be: a symbol of transformation, growth, and the kind of positive change that occurred when assumptions gave way to understanding and respect. The laughter had stopped, replaced by admiration for a Marine whose service exemplified everything the Corps stood for.